The console wars. Get used to not hearing this term anymore in the future. While at one point it seemed like a never-ending arms race, but with news and rumors about Xbox leaving the industry, you can only wonder what the industry will look like in the future, especially when you think about Nintendo Switch 2's rocky reveal. Although it feels like their place in the console industry is etched in stone. Rather than trying to out Xbox and PlayStation, they decided to go their own route, which is leverage their world-class IPs and not focus on this never-ending race for graphical fidelity. But as you know, things can't stay the same way forever. Things can change really fast. Think about Sega, which at one point was one of the top competitors within the industry, and just within 10 years became a third-party publisher. Which brings us back to Sonic the Hedgehog. Which generation of consoles featured the best Sonic games by group? Well, let's rank them all. Of course, Sonic the Hedgehog has been around for nearly 35 years, so he's been around for most of the console generations. The legendary story of Sonic the Hedgehog begins on the 4th generation of consoles, and that starts with the Sega Genesis. The two most notable consoles and competitors of the time were Sega and Nintendo, Sonic vs. Mario. Whether you love the classic Sonic games or hate the classic Sonic games because opinions vary and shift over the years, this is where everything started, and there is a wide sentiment amongst the gaming community that the classic Sonic games, the 2D platformers, are in fact the best in the series, and there's some fans that go as far as to say that Sonic was never good after these games released. Of course, I wouldn't be here making videos for you all if that was actually the case, because I happen to like the 3D Sonic games. That's just some opinion that's out there amongst some pockets of the gaming community. The first thing that you're greeted with when you fire up this game is the iconic Green Hill Zone, and you know that this game is influential because much to the dismay of Sonic fans, it's been featured in nearly every single Sonic game since. I must admit, in the current day and age, 2025, I'm not really much of a Sonic 1 enjoyer, but there's no denying that at the time in 1991, this was absolutely a revolutionary game. It took what we knew about platformer games, which was to run and jump on platforms, and kind of pushed it to a new level. What if satisfyingly building up and maintaining speed through skill, while platforming of course, was the name of the game, and replaying the levels in order to find the best routes. The best players will always have the most optimal route. Plus, you also had really cool things such as rolling physics, and you have yourself a very simple yet addicting gameplay loop. What if we took that gameplay loop and made it even better in Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and also gave him an iconic sidekick, Tails? That's pretty much what happened, because Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is actually my favorite classic Sonic game, and they took the level design and the philosophy of Sonic 1 and made it even faster and arguably more replayable, and you give Sonic a brand new ability called the Spin Dash, which is also extremely influential as it's basically one of his main attacks that has been seen throughout the series since. The game also introduced a totally original character in Super Sonic that was not influenced from anywhere else. It took speed, level design, and spectacle to a whole new level. In my opinion, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is better than 1 in almost every single way. Not a bad start for the blue guy. The third Sonic the Hedgehog game is not Sonic 3, it's actually Sonic CD. This game released in 1993, and the opening cutscene of this game truly defines what classic Sonic really is all about. The level design and philosophy of this game is actually much different than Sonic 2, which is about high speed and pace. This one is more so about exploration, and I would say vertical up and down platforming and level design. There are a lot of people that love Sonic CD, and I don't think it's a bad game, although I'm just more of a Sonic 2 kind of guy. One of the main gimmicks of this game is the time travel mechanic, which requires you to go back into the past or the future in order to alter the direction of time. The highlight of this game is obviously the introduction of one of Sonic's greatest rivals, which is Metal Sonic, as well as Amy Rose, two characters that will become staples in the series. Overall, it's a pretty solid title, but the true pinnacle of this generation has to be Sonic 3 and Knuckles. In a lot of ways, Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles are technically considered separate titles, but these days, most people consider them to be one game. The original Sonic the Hedgehog 3 released in February of 1994, while Sonic and Knuckles, a direct continuation, was released 8 months later in October of 1994. Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles were supposed to actually be one singular game, but it was too big to fit on one cartridge, so they introduced a lock-on technology, which when combined, you get the full game. So basically 2 separate releases for part 1 and part 2 of the same game. This game was certainly the most ambitious Sonic game to date. It featured 14 different zones, an amazing soundtrack, level-to-level cutscenes that bridged the story together, and by the way, despite being a 16-bit game with no voice acting, there is a real story for this game. And most importantly, 3 playable characters, which greatly expanded the level design because now you have separate routes for different playstyles. That made Sonic 3 and Knuckles infinitely replayable. This is widely considered amongst many people one of the greatest 2D platformers of all time. This is also one of the few Sonic games where you could say, hey, I think this game is actually better than its Mario counterpart, and people wouldn't look at you like you're crazy. Also, another great feature of this game was the introduction of power-ups. So now you have even more gameplay gimmicks to add to the game, and it just feels like the Sonic series was getting better and better with each release. So while most of what Sega has touched up until this point has been fire. There was Sonic Spinball, which ironically is the first Sonic spin-off game, and it wasn't even developed by Sonic Team, so I guess you could cut them some slack. And this game was certainly a step down in quality as opposed to the mainline 2D platformers, so it wasn't all bangers during this era. I always hated this game and never got very far in it, and I think the controls are clunky, the physics are clunky, but I don't think that this game is enough to drag down an era of all-time classics that influenced a generation and sparked the birth of an iconic franchise. We also can't forget about Knuckles Chaotix, which was released during the 4th generation of consoles, although it's trying to be a 5th generation game because Sega made use of the 32X add-on to the Genesis to make it a 32-bit processing game. You'll see the best examples of this during the 3D special stages. There's definitely some cool gimmicks and concepts explored in Knuckles Chaotix, but a lot of times the partner system in the game can be seen as a frustrating gimmick that gets in the way of what the game is trying to do, which is be a competent classic Sonic game, which is why the game wasn't received all that positive compared to some of the other classics. Oh yeah, Sonic 3D Blast was also released for the Sega Genesis, but I honestly consider this more of a Sega Saturn title, which would fall under the 5th generation category. As a Genesis game, I guess it's not the worst. Like, yeah, you do kind of have to consider the time period in which this game released and what other games were available, but even this game was starting to feel a little dated, and I also just don't like it. So with that being said, where does the 4th generation fall on the tier list? I think it safely and unequivocally goes in the S tier. Imagine getting 4, I mean technically 5 mainline bangers in the same generation in a span of like 3.5 years. In addition to that, the Sega Genesis was a formidable competitor to the Nintendo SNES and took a huge chunk of its market share, so that is very admirable. That just doesn't happen without the classic Sonic games released on the system, so their impact proportionate to all of the other eras cannot be understated. You have a couple of flops, but they are not enough to drag this anywhere out of the S tier. So Sega is absolutely cooking. They put out a generation-defining console. Sonic is doing better than ever. So how do they follow it up? Well, enter the Sega Saturn, which was Sega's leap into the 5th generation. The Sega Saturn was technically impressive. Unfortunately, due to the way that it was designed with two 32-bit processors, it was very difficult for developers to create games for the system. Unfortunately, at the time, it wasn't just Nintendo that was Sega's competition. As a matter of fact, Nintendo had competition as well, and that's because Sony released the PlayStation 1, one of the best-selling consoles of all time. To be honest, it took Nintendo a couple of generations to catch up to Sony and the PlayStation because they were getting routinely outsold for a couple generations after that, as far as home consoles go. The Sega Saturn didn't necessarily sell terribly, but it did get outsold by the PlayStation like 11-1, and most of the sales came in Japan. So take a look at the Sega Saturn's performance, and now take a guess as to how Sonic performed during this era. So there weren't many games to speak of during this era. One of them was Sonic R, which is a spin-off racing game. Now, I personally love this game and I have a lot of fondness for it, but the controls of this game are very clunky at best. There really isn't that much content in the game. While it has a very unique atmosphere and charm to it, like I love the OST of this game, I like that it's fully in 3D, I like that there's exploration aspects. The Sonic characters are actually racing on foot, like it actually kind of feels like a Sonic game. The characters have their actual abilities that they possess in the series. The game had relatively mixed reviews, which is a far cry from what Sonic was just a couple of years ago. When you hear the phrase that Sonic had a rough transition to 3D, games like this were very much a part of that. During the Sega Saturn era, there really was no true 3D Sonic platformers developed. And that's because during this era, the OG Sonic team was working on Nights into Dreams. Another game that was available for the Sega Saturn at the time was Sonic 3D Blast, which also was available on the Sega Genesis. And they call this a 3D game, but it's really not. This game was different than its Genesis counterpart as the graphics were slightly improved. The 3D blasting, if you will, occurs in the special stages, as these are different. You also had these cutscenes that were featured in the Sega Saturn version also. As far as the gameplay of this game goes, I'm definitely not a fan because it's not a traditional Sonic game. It's more so like a tedious fetch quest game. You have to look around the map to find enemies to kill to free the flickies, and if you get all 5 flickies, you can advance to the next portion of the stage. It's certainly a much different experience than the 2D platformers from the Sonic era, as that gameplay style wasn't really translated into true 3D until the Sonic Adventure series. You want to like this game, like it's got a little bit of charm to it, it's got a nice OST, but then it's like you play the first level and then you're kind of over it. The isometric top-down view just didn't really work. Like there's some sections in the game that actually requires you to platform, and it's just like very hard to gauge where Sonic is actually jumping. This was another Sonic game that once again got mixed reception during this era and was just simply not on par with the quality of the original 2D platformers in the series. Like I said, as a standalone Sega Genesis game that has nothing to do with Sonic, I guess I could see why some people might think the game's okay for like maybe 1991 or 1992. 2 standards, but this is 1996. This is the same year that Super Mario 64 came out. Granted, the 64 was a much more powerful system, but Sonic was falling behind. So that brings us to the game that comes after Mario 64, and that is Sonic Jam, which was the only Sonic Team game developed during the Sega Saturn era. And basically what we got was a tech demo in the overworld with a bunch of like mini challenges that Sonic could complete. Granted, this would serve as inspiration for future titles like Sonic Adventure as well as Sonic Frontiers, but this was just a small portion of Sonic Jam. A majority of what the game was essentially ports of Sonic 1, 2, 3, and Knuckles. Also the museum with a bunch of artwork and celebration of Sonic's history. So I wouldn't even necessarily consider this like a full-blown original Sonic release. So the 5th generation of consoles was definitely the beginning of the end for Sega. There was not a single full-blown original Sonic Team release. I honestly think that you have to put it in the F tier. I like Sonic R. It's not a bad game, but this truly is the weakest generation in the history of Sonic, I think. Which brings us to the legendary 6th generation of consoles, which featured the Sega Dreamcast to kick off the era, the Sony PS2, Nintendo GameCube, and Microsoft's first ever console, the Xbox. You know, the 6th generation was pretty long when Sega started it, and then mid-generation ended up bowing out of manufacturing consoles and producing games for the Xbox, GameCube, and PS2. So the 6th generation starts off with the Sega Dreamcast, and we get the best, in my opinion, Sonic game of all time, Sonic Adventure 1. Sonic Team hasn't produced a mainline Sonic game in nearly 4 years, so how do they respond? They truly overhaul the franchise and take that next-gen lead. Not only has the hardware improved, but we got a brand new design for Sonic the Hedgehog himself. His eyes are now green, his quills and his limbs are longer. He has this more edgy design. This guy is the epitome of cool. The first true 3D mainline platformer for Sonic is one of the most ambitious in the entire series. We have animated cutscenes that certainly didn't age poorly. We have expansive 3D levels to explore with many branching paths and open level design. We have the adventure field, which is a hub world which truly bridges the entire story together. 6 playable characters, intertwining stories between the 6 playable characters, which is one of the most immersive parts of the game, and a focus on story and narrative, something that separated Sonic from his contemporaries at the time, and honestly to this day. There's certainly some arguments to be made that some of the other gameplay styles aren't as good, but the game is called Sonic Adventure, and when it comes to the Sonic gameplay, it's probably the best that it's ever been in the series in terms of the controls. I'd say without a doubt, controlling Sonic in this game is much better than controlling Mario in Super Mario 64. Argue with a wall if you disagree. Maybe I'm biased, but it's probably the best start to any Sonic era. So how do they follow up this masterpiece? Well, they released Sonic Shuffle. What was Sonic Shuffle? Well, it's basically Mario Party, but worse. It's essentially a board game. You take turns running around the map, and then you play some mini games to duke it out. Interestingly enough, it was actually developed by the same Mario Party developers, so you would think that they captured a little bit of the same magic. I mean, the mini games aren't bad, but I really don't like the actual board gameplay. And overall, it got pretty mediocre reviews, so I think the majority of people share the same sentiment. I'm sure there's some truthers out there, but I am not one of those people. And then we finish off Sonic on the Dreamcast with the most famous Sonic game of all time, Sonic Adventure 2. This game is, without a doubt, the most influential post-Genesis game in the entire Sonic franchise. I think at this point, it's an objective fact. The big blockbuster Hollywood film, Sonic Movie 3, quite literally did an adaptation of this game, and it's no surprise that it was the most successful in the entire Sonic movie franchise. The Dreamcast version of Sonic Adventure 2 to this day is still the highest rated 3D Sonic game ever. The game introduced Shadow the Hedgehog, the second most popular character of all time in the franchise. Sonic Adventure 2 also introduced rail grinding into the series. I mean, talk about a staple. This has been in every Sonic game, whether it's Boost, Adventure, or everything in between since. It took Sonic Adventure 1 and made it a lot more streamlined and linear. It had a greater focus on narrative and probably to this day told the greatest Sonic story ever. They took the Chow Garden and made it better. They gave Sonic a couple of extra abilities, and you could certainly say certain aspects of this game have not aged as well, but at the time, you just had to be there for when this game was out. It truly was an awesome experience. Shortly after this game release, Sega left the console manufacturing industry, and this could have been the last time we ever saw Sonic.
Sayonara, Shadow the Hedgehog.
He certainly went out with a bang. That is until... So technically Sonic did already make the leap to Nintendo GameCube because Sonic Adventure 2 Battle was actually ported over to the GameCube and it came out not too long after the Dreamcast version. They also put Sonic Adventure on the GameCube with Sonic Adventure DX, and how could anyone forget Sonic Mega Collection? This game was your standard Sonic collection. It packaged a lot of the old classic Sonic games, although not all of them. It had a bunch of cool artwork and just general things from Sonic's history, and it truly was the perfect way to introduce these Nintendo kids who have never played Sonic before into the world and history of Sonic the Hedgehog. A perfect game collection for a near perfect era. But back to Sonic Heroes, my first ever Sonic game and one that I truly have a lot of fondness for. However, this game is pretty divisive when you look at it through a modern lens. As far as the reviews go for this game, it's a 72 on Metacritic and a 7.7 amongst the fans, so if you put that together, it's like a 7.5, let's call it. Brand new mainline 3D Sonic platformers were back, and they weren't just on Sega hardware. Now it's on Nintendo, GameCube, and PlayStation 2. Sonic Heroes was the first multi-platform game developed for all three of the major consoles at the time, a trend that would obviously continue to this day with the occasional exclusive here and there. What Sonic Heroes was trying to do was bring Sonic a little bit more back to his roots. It's essentially one core playstyle throughout the entire game. While there's 3 different playable characters per team, you can only control one of them at a time, and you're playing with all 3 simultaneously. The team-based mechanic was the game's featuring gimmick, and the reason why some people either love or hate this game is because it's a little bit unpolished. Controls are a little slippery. The rail grinding's kind of janky. There's some weird gimmicks like the pinball stages, and to truly beat the game, you have to play it from start to finish 4 separate times. And Team Chaotix just exists. The game's not perfect, but I have a lot of love for it. This game also is one of the highest selling 3D Sonic games ever, so you can definitely say that it was a success for the franchise. A year after Sonic Heroes, Sega released yet another classic Sonic compilation with the Sonic Gems collection. This was like the weird, trippier version of the Sonic Mega collection with less main titles. It had Sonic CD, Sonic the Fighters, and Sonic R. What's interesting about this release, though, is that this was the first time that Sonic the Fighters was available on home consoles as opposed to arcade machines. So it certainly was a compelling collection, and I guess all of the main games do feature Metal Sonic, who is on the cover. So maybe that was the angle. So overall, it's kind of weird that they released 2 separate classic compilations in the same era. But hey, I guess they made a lot of money, so I guess it makes sense on their end. Of the 2 Sonic compilations that released during the 6th generation, Gems Collection was definitely seen as the worst of the 2. I feel like up until this point, it was a perfect time to be a Sonic fan. While this is mainly focusing on the home console release for this section of the series, the marketing campaign used to describe years like 2003 and 2004 were the year of Sonic. We got a full-blown Sonic animated series with Sonic X. We got a ton of awesome Sonic handheld releases, in particular Sonic Advance 1, 2, and 3, and they were absolutely pumping out game after game. I think the real quote-unquote beginning of the end, if you will, for the Sonic franchise probably starts with Shadow the Hedgehog 2005. As far as the way this game plays, it's pretty similar to Sonic Heroes. You have the same character models, you have the same slippery controls. It does in a lot of ways feel like a nice streamlined continuation of the Sonic Adventure plotline. And growing up, I did think this game was awesome. I mean, Sega's mindset was just, what if we gave Sonic the Hedgehog a gun? I went back and replayed this game all these years later, and then I kind of realized, like, oh, the game that I used to love actually kind of sucks. There's a lot of interesting ideas that it pulls off, but in a lot of ways, it's just not properly executed and just has a lot of game padding. The idea that there's multiple different choices that you can have to affect the outcome of the story is pretty cool. The problem is that in execution, it just doesn't really work, and the plot doesn't really make that much sense. Doing tedious little checklist missions in a Sonic game just doesn't really seem like the best way to go about it. You'll spend the entire level looking for 35 different aliens, and if you miss one, you have to start all the way over from the beginning and search every nook and cranny in order to complete the mission. Instead of high-speed platforming and replaying a level over and over to find the best routes, it really slows down this game and just becomes extremely frustrating. I think this game also kind of started the death of Shadow's character. I feel like he's mischaracterized in this game frequently. The narrative about Shadow the Hedgehog, especially over like the last 5 to 6 years, that, oh, he's just this edgelord, there's no depth to his character. All those bad tropes can easily be traced back to this game and this game alone. The Shadow I know is from Sonic Adventure 2 and Sonic Heroes and Sonic 06, even though it came after. There's some fun to be had if you do like a neutral campaign and just go through the levels from start to finish like an actual Sonic game. But again, you're going to have to replay the game at least 10 different times, and you're going to have to do all the tedious missions. So a full-blown playthrough of this game from start to finish with all 10 endings and the Super Shadow boss fight is just not a great total experience. To put this into perspective, Shadow the Hedgehog has a 51 on Metacritic, and Sonic 06, the most infamous Sonic game in the entire franchise, has a 46, so it's not even that far off. So the nostalgia goggles unfortunately need to be taken off, and we have to chalk up Shadow the Hedgehog as a net negative for the Sonic franchise at the time. There's one final game from the 6th generation, and that is another all-time banger. And that, of course, would be Sonic Riders, one of the most iconic Sonic games of all time. This was an original Sonic game released back in 2006, and this wasn't your traditional mascot platformer racer party game. For me personally, I feel like you'll never be able to out Mario Kart, so I feel like the best value proposition for a racing game would be something that tries to do its own thing and has something that Mario Kart doesn't have, and that's exactly what Sonic Riders was. Yes, this game just radiated the energy that the Sonic series carried throughout this era. Instead of driving around in cars, the main vehicle for transportation in this game is the Extreme Gear, which are these high-tech hoverboards. What this game featured, though, was a unique story mode, an entirely new way to attack racing games in the sense that you had a resource management system that included tricks in order to make sure that you stay on your hoverboard. And while yes, looking back on this game, there's certainly some jank and polish that's missing, and at times it feels like it can be a little bit frustrating, but if you can get past some of the rough edges of this game, mastering the mechanics is extremely satisfying. Perhaps the game was a little bit ahead of its time as it received only a 59 on Metacritic, but ultimately got an 8 out of 10 user score, so people really did like this game, but maybe the impact amongst the general audience wasn't as felt. But among Sonic fans specifically, it's absolutely beloved. I mean, you still see it in the series to this day in some of the mobile games as well as the comics, and the Extreme Gear is also going to be featured in the newest Sonic racing game, Sonic Racing Cross Worlds, so the influence and impact that it had cannot be understated, at least amongst like the actual Sonic fan base. So what are we doing with the 6th generation of consoles? My personal bias and nostalgia says put this in the S tier unequivocally. There's no doubt it goes anywhere else, but hear me out. Adventure 1 and Adventure 2 are definitely bangers, but there's some people out there that are like, hey, listen, the mech stages aren't that good, the treasure hunting's not that good. The GameCube port that released for Sonic Adventure only got a 57 on Metacritic. Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, the port that released for the GameCube, not the Dreamcast version, got a 73. Sonic Heroes, a game that I personally like, has a lot of people that despise this game. Like, this game is so weird in the sense that you either love this game or you hate it, and there are some people that think this is like one of the worst Sonic games ever. It's kind of crazy. Regardless, like an extremely divisive game. Sonic Riders, like, yeah, we as the fans love this game, but the general reception maybe wasn't as strong. Sonic Mega Collection and Gems Collection, they're just ports. Shadow the Hedgehog was widely seen as a bad game. So if I remove my biases and feelings from the 6th generation of consoles, I think with that public perception of some of the games, I'm gonna bump it down to the A tier. I'm not going any lower though. In my opinion, this is probably the greatest generation of consoles. It includes the Xbox 360, the Nintendo Wii, as well as the PlayStation 3. This was the era of mass adoption for online multiplayer gaming, particularly in consoles. It existed prior, but by the Xbox 360 era, it was truly here. While Sony and Microsoft were competing and trying to create the next high graphical fidelity machine, Nintendo took a step back and went with more of a gimmick for their console with the Nintendo Wii featuring the motion controls. This thing was certainly not a next-gen console. So how did Sonic fare during this generation of consoles? Well, it was probably the most consequential one yet. The Sonic franchise was looking to take the leap into the next generation of consoles with Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. There's not really much that needs to be said about Sonic 06 other than the fact that it nearly killed the franchise. It was an utter disaster because a lot of people consider this to be the worst video game ever made. Definitely could have fooled me though, because I didn't find out that this game was bad until years later. Growing up, I thought this game was actually awesome. In my eyes, this game will always be the true Sonic Adventure 3 in the way that it tells its story. Had the multiple playable characters with the linear stages, the intertwining narrative, and the level design in general is probably the closest thing that we've gotten to Sonic Adventure 1 since. But make no mistake, in terms of the quality, this is a very poor product. The game was kind of doomed from the start because Sonic Team was split into two. One half was working on Secret Rings, the other half was working on Sonic 06, and they rushed this game to meet a holiday 2006 deadline by Microsoft. It's crazy because perhaps if you gave this game like an extra year, it probably could have been the greatest Sonic game ever. The game itself was plagued with really unpolished gameplay. There was a ton of game-breaking bugs. Although the bugs, to be honest, like I spent a lot of time just finding them because I thought it was really fun. The physics and movement of the game were certainly a downgrade from previous Sonic games such as Sonic Adventure 1. There was the awful romance element of the game that a lot of people didn't like either and found it to be weird. A lot of the mock speed section stages were barely functional and extremely frustrating for a lot of players. The new playable character Silver was extremely slow and boring, at least in my opinion. You would get absolutely barraged with loading screens that took forever. I certainly appreciate everything that this game tried to do, but you can't lie, as a product, it was certainly an unfinished game. The legacy of this game is pretty wild because 20 years later, you'll still see articles from game journalists using this game as an example to on the Sonic franchise. It's rated amongst critics one of the worst 3D Sonic games ever, so there's no denying that this game did some damage to the franchise. So how did Sonic Team bounce back from Sonic 06? Well, a couple of months later, they released Sonic and the Secret Rings, the other game that kind of contributed to this game's failure. Sonic and the Secret Rings didn't necessarily fare much better than Sonic 06, although it is considered to be better. The main gameplay gimmick of this game is featuring the Wii's motion motion controls. The game's an autorunner, so you don't really have full control over Sonic, you kind of just like guide his movement. The janky motion controls were definitely enough to frustrate a lot of players who played it. And while it's not necessarily a horrible game, like it's certainly a playable experience, I wouldn't say necessarily this was the direction that Sonic needed at the time. Let's skip ahead a bit real quick to also talk about the other storybook game, which was Sonic and the Black Knight. It's a very similar situation to how Secret Rings played out. Everything about this game is perfect. The vibes, the atmosphere, the story, the voice acting, but the only thing that isn't is the actual gameplay. By far, this game is Jason Griffith's best performance as Sonic the Hedgehog, and a lot of the things that I love about Sonic were gone from the character after this game flopped. It's kind of a shame because literally it's peak voice acting and writing. It's another one of those situations where the Metacritic score really wasn't that great, a 54, but the user score was a 7.4. All right, so first we skipped ahead, now we gotta go back to one of the most unique games in the entire Sonic series, and that is Sonic Unleashed. So how did Sonic Team bounce back from the near franchise-killing disaster of Sonic 06? Well, they released this game. In terms of quality and presentation, Sonic Unleashed is definitely like the most AAA feeling Sonic game probably ever. It features an extremely simple but charming story, kind of the best example of how video game stories don't necessarily need to be the most serious or dark to be good. If you have good presentation, good voice acting, good characterization, a plot that invokes emotion, a globe-trotting journey across a visually stunning world, and an incredible climax, probably the best the series has ever seen, and you got something good on your hands. As far as the gameplay goes for Sonic Unleashed, it is the tale of two halves. The first half of the game adapts the boosting gameplay that was first seen in Sonic Rush. In terms of the correlation to Sonic's actual abilities put into gameplay, this is the most accurate it probably will ever be. You have this blazing fast speed with the boost mechanic, high-speed platforming that requires precision timing and reaction. You have 2D sections that are integrated into the 3D section in order to break up the pace and allow for even more platforming. And arguably, some fans say that after all these years, Sonic Unleashed is still the best that the boost formula has to offer. So why did this game get mediocre reception from the critics, but an 8.6 from fans? This isn't necessarily rocket science or breaking news, but obviously it's the Werehog. There are people that absolutely love the Werehog, and there's sections when even I think the Werehog's pretty fun, even though I'm not like the biggest fan of this gameplay style. I mean, if you think about it, the combat is definitely polished and it works. Some of the platforming sections can be fun, some of the combat can even be fun, but I think the biggest problem with the Werehog is just simply that it's radically different than the boosting gameplay. So it's like, if you like one, but you don't like the other, you're going to hate the game, or probably rate it a 6 out of 10. The Werehog can be pretty slow, and you get kind of like soft locked in these sections where you have to spam and button mash the combos. There are people out there that say, oh no, you just got to get good, you just got to master the combos, which is probably true. Like, if you actually master the gameplay style, that is certainly going to be the way that it reaches its full potential. Combine that with the fact that some of these Werehog levels can drag on for like 30 minutes. You have to search every nook and cranny of every stage for the Sun and Moon medals in order to progress. Some people will find out the hard way and get soft locked. It's just way too different from the day stages that feel more in line with what I'm looking for from a Sonic the Hedgehog game. I'm just simply not the biggest Werehog fan. It's too slow for me. And despite having the highest highs in the series by far, in my opinion,
I can certainly see why initially when this game came out, it was written off by critics and got mediocre reception. Also, on the other side of the coin, I can see why some fans over the years have come out and said like, wait, this actually is kind of like an underrated gem. The game is just a tale of two halves. What else can I say about it? I have a lot of love for it in my heart, but at the same time, I understand where people are coming from. Now, you might be asking yourself, where are the bangers from this era? Well, I'm here to present to you Sonic and Mario at the Olympic Games. So the two biggest rivals from the 90s, Sonic and Mario, have finally linked up to put their differences aside. Sega and Nintendo in a collab game. And what did they do? Well, they made a party minigame collection. This game came out for the Wii, and it's basically a glorified Wii Sports with Mario and Sonic characters. While you can definitely have some fun in this game, you know, you play with your friends or something like that, there's not really too much depth to it. But unfortunately, all the potential that these two series could have had if you put them together for like a mainline platform or something, this is all that we got, and unfortunately, it's not really moving the needle forward. They also dropped another Sonic Riders game, which was Sonic Riders Zero Gravity for the Wii and PlayStation 2. In a lot of ways, it's pretty much similar to the first one. They had this additional mechanic for the Zero Gravity, and they actually replaced a couple of mechanics from the original. Definitely has a lot of heart and soul, as the art style from the game is pretty cool, and it also features like a full-blown story with cutscenes and voice acting. If you like Riders 1, you'll probably like this game as well, although in my opinion, I think the original Riders is definitely a little bit better than this one. It's one of those situations, again, where the fan base, you know, they adore Sonic Riders, but the critic reviews were also really not that good for this game. All right, I get it. So you're asking me about the bangers for this era. Well, can I present to you Sonic the Hedgehog 4, Episode 1? So yeah, Sonic 4 Episode 1, it's a much maligned game in the series. And this game, technically, in terms of narrative and title, is a direct continuation or a direct sequel to the classic Sonic the Hedgehog games. Except for the fact that it's, like, not.
at all. Everything about this game is just weird. I mean, it's a 2D modern Sonic game, which you would think a lot of Sonic fans would love, but the physics of this game are not comparable to the actual classic games. The jump controls can feel a little bit clunky at times. The homing attack has been added, but that also just feels a little weird to use as well. Oh yeah, the special stages are back, but these are just reused from the original Sonic the Hedgehog game. And yeah, most people don't really like this game. I mean, I don't think it's the worst game, but it's just, like I said before, it's just an odd game. Sonic 4 Episode 1 was technically a mobile game, so I feel like for the time it was kind of impressive. But as a standalone console release, it really does not hold a candle to the original games it was trying to emulate. The review scores for this game were considered to be above average. It was like a 7 out of 10. Although Sonic fans do not like this game and gave it a 5.5 out of 10. So definitely a mixed bag. We also can't forget Sonic Free Riders. The last in the Rider series was released during this era. The primary gimmick of Sonic Free Riders, and probably the reason for its existence, was to showcase Xbox's new technology from the Xbox Kinect. So instead of using a controller, you actually had to use your body to control the character. And this was certainly a step down from other installments in the franchise. First and foremost, we got rid of the actual cutscenes and replaced it with these PNGs. As a result of using these mechanics, the level design in the game was obviously scaled down, and the game is generally considered to be one of the worst Sonic the Hedgehog games of all time, and the reason why we don't get Sonic Riders games anymore. The Metacritic score was a whopping 47 with a generally unfavorable 2.6 user scores, so yeah, not good. Another Sonic racing series was birthed, and that was Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. It's essentially your platformer, mascot, kart racer game, or whatever you want to call it. The gameplay of the game is pretty solid. While many people will be nostalgic for the series, and some people have a lot of fond memories of it, I don't think this is necessarily pushing the brand forward with any genre-defining mechanics or anything like that. Definitely a solid title, though. All right, the bangers. Let me introduce you to Sonic Colors. Finally, after all these years, Sonic Colors was the game that was considered to be a return to form for the franchise. The daytime stages from Sonic Unleashed that everyone liked, what if instead of adding the Werehog to the game, we added this gameplay style which people liked? Okay, there's like a lot of 2D in this game. Maybe it's not one-to-one with Unleashed, but granted, this game was released on the Wii, so some technical limitations were certainly there. But for a Nintendo Wii game in 2010, I can certainly say that this game looks pretty incredible, especially when you consider the fact that just a couple of years ago, Sonic Unleashed Wii really was like a very barren game in terms of like the background and set pieces. Now, granted, Sonic Colors was developed exclusively for the Wii, whereas Sonic Unleashed Wii was also developed for the PS2, so you can see that. But I think the visuals of this game definitely hold up to this day, and probably will continue to with the great art style. But this game really brings you back to the basics. It's one consistent gameplay style throughout, so there's no like gimmicks or anything weird. Okay, technically there are gimmicks because the whiffs are featured in the game, but they don't divert from the main gameplay style. They're simply there to enhance the platforming experience. There's no motion controls, there's no sword, there's no slow button mashy beat 'em up combat Werehog sections, there's no treasure hunting stages, no mech shooters, it's just Sonic. Point A to point B, high-speed platforming in a short and sweet but simple adventure. As a result, we get the first generally favorable 3D Sonic game released, I think, since Sonic Adventure 2 on the Dreamcast, with an 8 out of 10 user score, basically an 8 out of 10 critic score. This was certainly revolutionary for the franchise at the time. With that being said, though, Sonic Colors is certainly not a perfect game. There's some gripes that a lot of people have with it, some gripes that I have with the game. I'm not going to do a full-blown review of the game, but there's certainly one thing that I think it's important to mention. One of the biggest downgrades from this game is that they stripped, like, the story away from Sonic. Like, this game's story is extremely simple. The writing is very bad. It started a trend for future Sonic games that would eventually kind of lead us into the era that we are in now. More on that later. But overall, it's hard to recognize this game as anything other than a massive success when this era was just littered with, like, bad games. Sega then follows up Sonic Colors by going back to back by dropping an undisputed banger of a game, Sonic Generations. Some people would argue that consecutively, these are the two greatest 3D Sonic games to be released back to back since the adventure games. And honestly, some people don't even like the adventure games, so it certainly comes down to personal preference, but most people can agree that Sonic Generations is probably one of the most polished 3D Sonic experiences ever. The lessons learned from Sonic Unleashed that were applied into Sonic Colors have now been fully fleshed out in a system that can actually handle a full game like this. Generations is a celebration of Sonic's past. It was released for Sonic's 20th anniversary, and it features a collection of Sonic's greatest hits reimagined in 3D. Or 2D, honestly. This game has a lot of 2D also. The game also introduced a split between classic Sonic and modern Sonic, giving them two separate designations. Classic Sonic's gameplay is pretty good as well. It's not a recreation of the Genesis games, but it's a really fun experience in its own right. Oh, I'm dead serious. I know people like to hate on this little pipsqueaks gameplay, but if you use that OP spin dash and actually get it right, memorize the level design, take some of those alternative paths by finding the red star rings, you'll start to have a blast because this gameplay style will really open up for you. Modern Sonic stages return the boost formula and give us some of the best level design that we've ever seen. Tons of spectacle, high-speed sections, multiple branching paths that encourage speedrunning, and replaying the levels to improve your time. It's simply a great Sonic game, and while there's two separate gameplay styles, which will always create some division amongst critics, ultimately both gameplay styles are both in line with the core fundamentals of the series. Get to point A to point B as fast as possible while platforming. The game once again suffers from the trend of Sonic Colors by not really having a great story. A genuinely lackluster finish, like this is the first game to make a Super Sonic boss fight just like not even that cool or suspenseful, but it gives the people what they want and what they really needed at the time when the series was faltering, and that is just good gameplay. Also, during this era, we got Sega All-Stars Racing Transformed, which is widely considered to be a huge upgrade over its predecessor. Now, remember how I said the first All-Stars Racing wasn't really that unique, doesn't really bring anything to the table? I think this version of Sonic Racing does a lot more cool things. Now we're racing by land, air, sea. And Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed is widely considered to be the best Sonic racing game to date. A lot more replayability, tons of great tracks, great characters, and overall a very solid experience. It's a kart racer though, so it's not going to carry the generation, but it was certainly a solid title nonetheless. And most importantly, an improvement. There was also two more Sonic and Mario Olympic games released during this console era, but once again, you played one, you've kind of played them all. It's just like a party minigame collection. I wish Sega and Nintendo would get together and collab on an actual video game. Oh yeah, we got a Sega tennis game, but does this even count as a Sonic game? I don't know. Oh yeah, we also got Sonic 4 Episode 2 during this era, which was a continuation of Sonic 4 Episode 1, obviously, and this game introduces Tails, and there's like a team-up mechanic. The game's visuals are significantly improved from Episode 1. The physics seem a little slightly better. And while yes, I think this game is an improvement over the first game, unfortunately, it still doesn't really feel that good to play, and that is the biggest crime of any platformer. If the game doesn't control well, I'm not messing with it. While the partner mechanic for the game is fun in principle, like the actual movement of the gameplay is fun, the problem is like this little buffer in between using it. Every time you press the button to team up, there's like this 2 or 3 second delay, so it really gets in the way when you have to use it a bunch of times throughout the game, and certainly breaks up the pace. One thing you don't want to do in a classic Sonic game is break the pace. The physics of the game are still weird. He doesn't really carry momentum the way he does in the classics. The homing attack also has like a weird delay to it as well, so that's also kind of pace breaky. Overall, the game is just simply not as smooth as the classics that it's trying to emulate, just like Sonic 4 Episode 1. The bosses in this game also kind of suffer from Sonic Superstar Syndrome, which we'll get into a little bit later in the video, but to make a long point short, some of these bosses take longer than some of the levels that you're playing in. And speaking of the levels, the level design can feel a little clunky at times. It feels like it can be kind of hard to maintain a flow and pace in this game, so that is certainly something that's working against it. But at the end of the day, it's not a horrible game. It's probably like a 6 out of 10, 6.5. It's kind of weird. Sonic 4 Episode 1 is considered by the Sonic community to be the worst of the two, but the reviews for Sonic 4 Episode 2 are worse than Sonic 4 Episode 1. There was actually a Sonic 4 Episode 3 plan that was going to feature Knuckles and the Master Emerald, and presumably getting tricked by Dr. Eggman, but this never materialized, probably because the game was a flop. Overall, a net negative for the franchise at the time. So after that long history lesson, we are here to talk about the 7th generation of consoles. Some people, with just Sonic Unleashed, Sonic Colors, and Sonic Generations, that's enough to throw this thing into the S tier. But in my opinion, there's a lot of bad games in this era. There's also like, I think Sonic was on the brink of like destruction with games like Sonic 06. The storybook games weren't really that well liked when they came out. Sonic 4 Episode 1, even Unleashed. Like Unleashed was a banger, but people at the time didn't really like the game. So I think with some of the ups as well as the downs with this generation, like there really was some catastrophes. I'm gonna go ahead and throw it into the B tier. It really started to pick up towards the end with Colors and Generations. And that brings us to the 8th generation, which would include the Wii U, the Xbox One, and the PlayStation 4. The Wii U was a colossal, giant failure. And speaking of the Wii U, Sega linked up with Nintendo to give us 2 exclusive Sonic games for the console. The first of the 2 games released for the Wii U was Super Mario Galaxy at Home, and that is Sonic Lost World. Sonic Lost World is kind of a weird game. It's one of those games when you look at it, you want to like it. It's kind of bringing back that classic Sonic art style. If you're someone that didn't like werewolves or storybooks or human princesses, seeing this aesthetic might entice you to actually pick up this game. That's, of course, if you actually bought a Wii U. Of course, nobody bought the Wii U as it was discontinued literally 3 years after its release. Probably the quickest out of any console. Okay, I said probably. So the thing about this game is up until this point, the boost formula was working really well for the Sonic franchise. Sonic Unleashed, maybe it wasn't received well, but almost everyone liked the daytime stages. Colors was good, Generations was good. But in this game, they ditched the boost formula and went with this, like, I don't even know what to call it. I wouldn't wouldn't call it adventure style. It's kind of its own thing. Instead of a boost button, there's now a run button, which you have to hold in order to make Sonic go faster. The coolest thing that the game introduced was the parkour mechanic, and it's kind of sad that because the game flopped, they didn't expand upon this or polish it or like kind of flesh it out a little more. But to me, the movement's kind of the weakest part of the game. It doesn't move like a traditional Sonic game. It does some cool things, and there's definitely some cool tricks you can pull off, but overall, it doesn't really feel great to control. Like, I feel like the air controls in this game can cause for a lot of death and frustration. Some of the gimmicks of the game are certainly breaking up the pace. The homing attack in this game is easily the worst version of it ever. I mean, look at what happened right here, how it just like sent me back in the level. Sonic the Hedgehog game should feel good to play, and a majority of the time, at least my opinion, I don't think this game feels that great. To be honest, it doesn't even feel like a Sonic game. You don't like naturally gain speed or anything like that. A lot of the gimmicks can be extremely frustrating. I mean, it's certainly a platformer. Like, there's a lot of platforming in this game, but that doesn't make it good. And remember how I talked about the disturbing trend that Sonic Colors brought into the series? What happens when the stories and writing is really bad, but also people view the game as bad? That's when people's patience starts to wear thin with these lighter stories. Some people probably didn't like them to begin with, but this really made it worse. A platformer with imprecise controls is usually a recipe for disaster, and the critics didn't really like this game. They gave it a 6 out of 10. So this generation of Sonic games is certainly not off to a great start, but it couldn't get any worse, right? Well, let me introduce Sonic Boom. You know, Sega was really on the cusp. They had something great going with the boost formula. It was getting better and better with each game. And then they dropped Sonic Lost World. People were definitely upset. And then they dropped this game, and that was it. Sonic Boom was the start of a spin-off franchise. One of the things that they did with Sonic Boom, which was taking one of the best character designs in all of video games and completely butchering it. And the goal of this was to rebrand Sonic to appeal to more Western audiences and bring in a golden age of licensing revenue. They also dropped a full-blown TV show as well, which, to be fair, was actually pretty good. Granted, it basically has next to nothing to do with the Sonic the Hedgehog that you know and love, but as its own standalone thing, it's okay. Without getting too deep into it, this is widely considered to be one of the worst Sonic games ever. Some people argue that the game was rushed and there's a lot of missed potential with it, but at its core, the gameplay of this game is very different than what people expect from the franchise, and it's a very big departure from the things that made the series great. The game's review score was a 32, and it got a user score of 3.7, so yes, it actually might be the worst ranked Sonic game ever. So while Sonic Generations and Sonic Colors were two games that were received extremely well, which made people think that the franchise might be back, Sonic Lost World and Sonic Boom brought this franchise to a new dark age. It's been a couple of years since we got the disaster of Sonic Boom, and now we are moving into Sonic Mania, which was released in 2017. While Sonic Mania wasn't really developed by Sonic Team, it showed that the series' roots were still something that wasn't worth throwing away. Sonic Mania brought the beloved Genesis formula back into the franchise, and it did not show any signs of age. As a matter of fact, some people consider this to be the best Sonic game ever. Sonic Mania, to this day, is still one of the highest rated Sonic games. You can certainly criticize some things about it, like there's a lot of reused level design and level themes. There's also a lot of reliance on nostalgia, like it's not a fully 100% original game, but you can't really argue with the quality of the game. But is it enough to save Sonic in this era? We haven't gotten a mainline Sonic game in a couple of years, so what did Sega announce next? Well, we got a game from the team that brought us Sonic Colors and Sonic Generations, and that is Sonic Forces. We ditched the blue arms. We brought in classic Sonic, although maybe this was a little ill-advised, but people like Generations, so yeah, we brought back classic Sonic. And they brought in an OC creator, so Sonic fans were definitely over the moon about this game when it was announced. Like, the cinematic trailers for it just looked absolutely insane. The problem with the game is that it didn't really turn out so good. So people had insane expectations. They waited 4 years for this game, and the final result was something that was extremely easy. This game you could beat in probably like 2 hours. The level design in this game was so simple. Half of the gameplay is just holding the boost button and just watching the game play itself. The controls of the game also weren't great. They were pretty clunky. Classic Sonic in this game plays nothing like the Genesis games, and he doesn't even control better than Sonic Generations. Like, we already did this, so how did it get worse? Couple that in with the fact that the levels are like 1 minute long, and this game was extremely disappointing. I don't think this is the worst Sonic game. As a matter of fact, I think there's definitely some fun that you can have with it. The problem is that we waited 4 years for this. They tried to make the stories a little better, but ultimately it was the same writing team that still didn't fundamentally understand the characters. The biggest crime of this game is that Sonic fans were hyped up for 4 years. It's been so long since we got a mainline Sonic game, and then their expectations are completely subverted. The end result was a 57 on Metacritic, and it's been a while since we got a good mainline 3D Sonic game, so people were hitting the panic button and writing off the franchise. And then a couple years later, we brought back Sonic Kart Racing with Team Sonic Racing, which had a story mode, but obviously was low budget, as you can tell by these PNG cutscenes. It had an interesting team-based mechanic, but overall didn't really do anything for the game. For the most part, the game just exists. There's really no reason to play this game over something far superior like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. So while this era was considered considered widely to be a massive drought for the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise, we did team up with Mario one more time to release Sonic and Mario at the 2020 Olympic Games for the Nintendo Switch. The first and only in the Switch era. While this series was nothing really more than just a fun party minigame collection that you could play with your friends and have a good time, none of the games in this series were necessarily met with like extremely over-the-moon praise. But I do think there's a lot of people that are going to miss this series and probably have some fond memories playing it growing up. In a way, this feels kind of bittersweet, and the series may not be coming back because the Olympics ditched the Mario and Sonic series to explore NFTs and esports, allegedly. The final game in the Mario and Sonic series did get mixed reception, but actually it's probably one of the higher received games during the 8th generation. But anyways, not really doing much for this era. So what are we doing with the 8th generation? The 8th generation also includes the Switch, by the way. It's kind of weird, but I mean, I guess with Sonic Mania, you could throw it in the C tier, but I'm super biased. I hate Sonic Lost World. Sonic Boom, I dislike. Sonic Forces, not good enough. So I'm honestly throwing this generation in the D tier. A lot of damage was done to Sonic in this time. It wasn't just the 06 Dark Era. This little time period has something to do with it as well. So now we move on to the 9th generation of consoles, and probably the most consequential one yet. Some people are saying that the death of consoles is imminent. As of today, the only 9th generation consoles that are currently on the market are the PlayStation 5 as well as the Xbox Series S and X. So technically the 9th generation of consoles begins on November 2020. So for the sake of argument, any game released after November 2020, we're going to put in the 9th generation era. We are in a brand new era of Sonic because the first Sonic the Hedgehog movie was released in 2020. And it changed the direction of the franchise forever. Somehow, seemingly on accident, the movie wildly exceeded expectations, so now the games needed to follow suit. Which brings us to the first game of the 9th generation era, which is Sonic Colors Ultimate, and technically it's an 8th generation game because it's developed for 8th generation hardware, but besides the point, it technically started 1 year after the 9th generation started, so we're going to go ahead and classify this as a 9th generation game. Now this game, by definition, was really not a good port. It added some cool things to Sonic Colors Ultimate, like it actually added some new modes to the game. There's one where you can actually race against Metal Sonic, which is pretty cool. Sonic now has customization. You can pick different auras, you can pick different gloves, you can pick different shoes. I think this is objectively a good thing for Sonic games. And at the end of the day, it still is Sonic Colors, which is a beloved game, so you have to give it that. But yeah, now to talk about the bad. There was a ton of bugs in this game when it released. There's like 30-minute compilations of things going wrong with this game pre-release. The visuals of the game don't necessarily look enhanced. They kind of have this washed out look with a lot of bloom. Tons of performance issues such as stuttering with the game. I personally experienced a lot of that with the PC version. Also, the game would crash a lot. So in addition to just like not being polished, not looking as good, having glitches, and probably the most egregious issue is the performance issues, it was widely considered to be a horrible port of the game. And quite frankly, it's pretty embarrassing that they weren't able to port over a Wii game properly to modern hardware. So the critic score of Sonic Colors Ultimate was lower than the original game, and the user score was also lower as well. So this generation still really isn't off to a good start, and it's been over a decade since we got a positively received 3D Sonic game. The next one needed to be big. All we had was 4chan leaks and this little teaser right here to hold us over for basically like a year. IGN finally showed an exclusive first look at the gameplay for Sonic Frontiers, and it was an absolute disaster. Everyone on the internet was roasting this. Sonic fans were hitting the panic button. Everyone was calling for the game to be delayed. It wasn't a good time to be a fan. And then subsequently, over the next couple of months, we got better and better footage, and people's nerves were calmed a little bit. But ultimately, the only thing that was going to matter was day one of the release and people's actual direct hands-on experience with a full playthrough of the game. When the game actually released, people were really liking Frontiers. It was bringing something new to the table. It wasn't perfect, right? Because the game obviously had a lower budget, a little bit of a lack of polish here and there, but for the most part, it had a really good gameplay loop. There was something very solid with the open zone. Platform around the island, collecting memory tokens in order to free your friends, defeat bosses and enemies around the map, in order to go into cyberspace, which is traditional Sonic gameplay and levels, kind of similar to Breath of the Wild. I mean, let's be real. It's pretty much Sonic Breath of the Wild, which would grant you a Chaos Emerald. You rinse and repeat till you get 7, you go Super Sonic, you fight the boss, and then you move on to the next island. To be honest, I love this game, and it actually is one of my favorite 3D Sonic games of all time. I think what I love the most about this game, and really any platformer game in general, like this is how you win me over, I just think the controls are so good. I feel like it's buttery smooth in the open zone. It's why Sonic Adventure 1 is also one of my favorite games. If the character feels good to play, like I'm gonna love it. This game kind of put Sonic Team back on the map. For the first time in a decade, people were starting to trust them again. And not too long after the game released, they even announced free DLC content for us to sink our teeth into, one of which included an alternative campaign, and overall, all 3 updates added a ton of content and exceeded my expectations. Like the final boss, after building up all the hype moments in aura with the supersonic boss fights being this purple rock, like it was quite frankly just embarrassing. So getting a proper conclusion to one of my biggest gripes with the game was certainly satisfying. Plus, the spin dash was one of the most fun abilities that they ever added to the game, in addition to the momentum slider. So Sonic Frontiers, in my opinion, is a great game. Certainly has some issues, and we won't go into all of them. We haven't gotten sales figures in a while, but as of 2023, it sold 3.5 million units, and Sega deemed it as a massive success. Whether you love the game or hate the game, Sonic Frontiers will always be remembered as the game that saved the franchise as far as the mainline platformer games go. Just a couple of months before Frontiers release, we also got Sonic Origins. Sonic Origins was marketed as the definitive way to play the classic Sonic games. All 4 games were remade in the retro engine, and we now have widescreen support and HD gameplay. Now, were these perfect ports? Well, not necessarily. Are they serviceable? Absolutely. There are tons of videos that will go into why Sonic Origins is not necessarily the absolute definitive way to play these games, but ultimately, at the end of the day, the average consumer who will play this game will probably enjoy it and not notice some of the things that were absent. I think honestly, just having an official way to play Sonic 3 and Knuckles on something like the Nintendo Switch for the first time ever could definitely be seen as a victory, but there's certainly some things that Sega could have done better with this port. Oh yeah, Sega also milked the fans when they released Sonic Origins Plus, which didn't really add much to the game other than a couple of Game Gear ROMs, and they added Amy Rose as a playable character. So for $10, you could upgrade your game, or for $40, the original price of the game. If you didn't buy the original, you just get Origins Plus. So if you bought Origins, you got scammed. I mean, ultimately, the most reviewed version of the game is in the green on Metacritic. It's only a 7.5 out of 10 for fan score, so you know, it is what it is, right? It's not like a major loss, but not like a major victory, I guess. What really came out of left field was Sonic Superstars. So that was the next game to be released. And this game was announced not too long after Frontiers release, only like 6 months. So nobody was expecting this. Sonic Superstars was billed to be the answer to the new Super Mario Bros. Series. We now have 4-player co-op on-screen multiplayer for the first time ever in the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. New Chaos Emerald powers. Fang the Hunter has finally returned to the series. We also got a new playable character. Sonic Superstars was certainly pacing to be one of the best Sonic games ever, except for the fact that it has these self-inflicted wounds and didn't quite get the review score that we wanted. So on the outset, the updated 3D visuals I think look pretty good. Like the environments are vibrant. The game is an art style that's full of color and life. I'll never understand the constant criticism I see of the visuals of this game on Twitter. I think they look fine. You have, for the most part, some really strong level design. Now, every classic Sonic game has a couple of levels that like you don't care for, and this game is certainly no exception. Golden Capital, Egg Fortress, but a lot of the time I feel like the level design is rock solid. The controls are buttery smooth and crispy. Like I said before, a platformer game, in order to win me over, has to have really solid controls. I could almost overlook tons of flaws if the movement in the game is fine, and this pretty much replicates the classic feel. So where did this game go wrong? Like, they had the recipes to get a 9 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10 on Metacritic. What happened? This happened. As a matter of fact, some of the boss battles in the game take significantly longer than the actual level that you're playing through. Typically in a classic Sonic game, I like to kind of just like cheese the bosses with iframes and just move on to the next level. This game doesn't really allow for that because they have these little soft lock phases. Fight the boss for 5 minutes and die? Okay, yeah, you got to do it again. Do it 15 times over and you're going to be frustrated with the game. The multiplayer feature that was a major selling point of the game, oh yeah, you can only do it in local co-op, so you can't play with your friends online, which I feel like should just be the bare minimum in 2024. Actually, this game released in 2023. Some people criticize the multiplayer in this game, saying it's a little too chaotic. It doesn't really work. I mean, honestly, I'm not going to go that far because it's a Sonic the Hedgehog game. I don't really know how you're going to keep 2 players on the screen going as fast as possible and make it 100% perfect. I feel like they kind of did the best that they could. And during my multiplayer playthrough of the game, I had a good time. Like, it's chaos, it's fun, that's what it's supposed to be. The Emerald powers, some of them are fun, some of them are not so useful, but I don't think they necessarily detract from the fun of the game. The new character, Trip, she's probably the most fun character to play with in the entire game. She has a great moveset, but her level design in her campaign is like the hard mode, so it's just like turned up to like 5 different degrees of difficulty. And there's a lot of cheap little tricks that they throw at you to throw off your pace, and it just like really breaks the fun of the experience. The actual online multiplayer that they added in the game, it's fun, but it's so lackluster and bare bones that it's not even worth talking about. I don't even know why they put it in the game. They should have invested any money and resources into allowing us to play co-op online. But ultimately, the game shines in its single-player time attack experience, if you will, and that's usually what I do when I play Sonic games. I replay the levels that I like, so I do like Superstars. But there's just so many self-inflicted wounds that could have been avoided disappointed with this game. It has so much potential and all the tools to just be one of the best Sonic games ever, and it just wasn't. But overall, like I said before, I think the game is pretty fun. It's miles better than anything we were getting over the last decade. It's significantly better than Sonic the Hedgehog 4, Episode 1 and 2, probably combined, if I'm being honest. So I would have liked just a little more, but overall, I'm chalking this up as a good game for this era. And now we move on to the final game. I can't believe that we've been doing this for an hour. I mean, I was expecting this video to be like 15 minutes, but here we are. So we have Shadow Generations. It seemed like Sega was gearing up for a Sonic Generations remaster according to the announced trailer. It didn't seem like anything was too out of the sort until the CGI cutscene played and Shadow appeared out of nowhere. Although technically we kind of knew this was going to happen due to some leaks that came out prior, but we got to look at brand new gameplay featuring Shadow the Hedgehog exclusively. Also, the big bad villain from the original Shadow the Hedgehog game, Black Doom, was back, so fans were hyped. But also people were a little bit skeptical. Is this going to be another Sonic Frontiers cyberspace situation, or would they improve the physics? At the same time though, they seem pretty confident in this game. They were showing off a lot of gameplay, a lot of cool hype moments like Mephiles returning to the game. We also saw that the game was going to feature an open zone, so maybe we were getting more than we bargained for, because at the time the discussion surrounding this game is like, is it a level pack, is it a full separate game? And for the most part, in terms of the amount of content you get, it's basically a full experience. We got the Doom power showed off. Like, Shadow Generations was looking pretty hype. The game came out and guess what happened? For the first time in a very long time, we got a 3D Sonic game finally in the green on Metacritic. 8 out of 10 with a 9 out of 10 user score, universally liked. Shadow Generations is just simply a very good Sonic game. It's extremely polished, the animations are great, the level design and controls are extremely fun. The story was pretty good, certainly better than anything that we got during the Meta era, although I wouldn't say it's like the best. A lot of the gimmicks and abilities that Shadow had, such as the Doom powers, were pretty fun to use. We got to mess around with Shadow's chaos control. The open zone had a lot of content. Like, the game is just straight up fun. It's good. There's not really much else to say about it. A lot of people are saying that Sonic and Shadow Generations as a total package is probably the best 3D Sonic experience that money can buy. Granted, the Sonic Generations remaster was largely untouched, and I guess maybe after experiencing Colors Ultimate, that's probably a good thing, I guess. Putting these two games together in one package was certainly a brilliant idea. So we basically get the highest received 3D Sonic game since Sonic Adventure 2 on the Dreamcast. So where are we putting the 9th generation of Sonic games, aka the Renaissance era? Well, we have two undisputed bangers, at least in my opinion: Sonic Frontiers and Shadow Generations. Sonic Frontiers, a little divisive. Sonic Superstars, a little divisive, but I like the game. And then Origins Plus, a little divisive, and Colors Ultimate definitely like drags us down a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and throw it into the A tier. Now, we still have time, right? There's still time for another Sonic game to be released within the next 2 years. So there might be another mainline 9th generation Sonic game, which can easily bring it up to the S tier, but we still have time. Cross Worlds isn't out yet, you know what I'm saying? Maybe one more mainline game. So for now, we're putting it into the A tier, but it's teetering on that. It's right there. I mean, it might as well be at the top of the A tier. So let me know if you guys agree with these rankings for the console generations, and stay tuned for the handheld rankings.